Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on our webinar. It's my pleasure to discussion today. My name is Anna Yanaeva. I'm Director of Business Development at OCT. OCT is one of the leading local CROs in the Eastern European region. We have been conducting clinical studies in different phases and indications for both big pharma and small biotech companies since 2005. With me today is my colleague Irina Petrova, who is Director of Clinical Operations at OCT. Irina is a medical doctor with a degree in psychiatry and over 15 years of international clinical research experience. At OCT, Irina is responsible for the overall supervision of our clinical projects, assigning and training project teams, controlling their workload, and assessing their performance. Hi, Irina, how are you today?
Hi, Anna. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. Hi, everyone. Good morning or good evening.
Great, we're happy to have you on board today. A couple of technical notes before we move on. On the right section of your screen, you can see the chat room where you can leave comments or ask questions. You can do that throughout the whole presentation, and we will answer all questions during the questions and answers section in the final part of our webinar. Let's just test this. I can see that somebody is typing in the chat box already. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. If you're experiencing any trouble with the video streaming or the sound, please leave a comment in the chat section. I hope that everybody made it to our webinar room by now, and I hope you had no trouble signing in. By the way, to minimize the troubles or the problems you might have with connection, make sure you access the webinar with Chrome, Opera, or Firefox browser. Also, you can connect to the webinar from your mobile device or tablet. Okay, so let's dive right in. The question stated in the topic of our webinar is, why do foreign sponsors, including American and European companies, conduct clinical trials in Russia? To answer this question, we would like to give you an overview of the current research climate in the country, as well as talk about the major factors influencing sponsors' decision to involve Russian sites into their clinical studies. That is enrollment potential, data quality, and of course, timelines. We will also tell you more about the clinical trial approval process in Russia. And a little intrigue here, all webinar participants will get a bonus at the end of the discussion, so stay with us. From my experience of communication with American companies, I know that some of them can be quite uncertain about involving Eastern European countries, including Russia, into their clinical studies. However, statistics provided by the Registry of Approved Clinical Trials by the Ministry of Health of Russian Federation, which is the main regulatory body in our country responsible for clinical trial approval, just like FDA in the US or EMA in Europe. So statistics shows that out of 654 clinical studies approved in Russia last year, almost 60% are studies initiated by foreign sponsors. USA is the leader among those foreign sponsors. Over 100 studies have been initiated by American companies last year, and the rest, 223, were initiated by European companies. So please take a look at these figures. Even though sponsors tend to go east when they need to enroll patients in the late phase studies, more and more companies have been placing early phase patient studies in Russia too. So here is the breakdown of these projects by phases. And on the next slide, you can see the breakdown of the studies based on the therapeutic area. The picture is more or less in line with the industry trends. So please take the time to recognize this information. And here are some of the companies that have initiated 2 or more studies in Russia last year. We can see big pharma here, we can see small companies or mid-sized players. Some of them are actually current OCT clients, and I also know that some of these companies' representatives are here with us today on the webinar, which is just great. We believe that the main factors making Russia an attractive country for foreign sponsors to place their clinical study in are, first of all, high enrollment potential of Russian sites, so feasibility, quality of data, obviously, and of course, timelines and costs. So let's talk about each of them. Obviously, enrollment of participants is crucial for any clinical study. As a part of FDA initiative to increase transparency of the demographic data of the pivotal clinical studies participants, FDA Center for Drug Evaluation and Research provided a report that actually shows the following statistics. Russia is the second largest country in the world in terms of the number of clinical trial participants in pivotal FDA-controlled studies. I guess many of you would be surprised to see that, and to be honest, I was surprised myself to know that Russia is on the second place. In addition to this, statistics from the Ministry of Health of Russia shows that every year a huge number of Russian patients are enrolled in different kinds of clinical studies, so more than 60,000 patients annually. Such attractiveness of Russia for clinical studies can be easily explained by a number of geographic and demographic factors. So first of all, Russia is among 10 biggest countries in the world with a population of almost 150 million people. Almost 70% of Russian population is concentrated in the European part of the country, that is up to Ural Mountains. Hundreds of clinical sites are located in the regional centers in the biggest cities with a population of over 1 million people, such as Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kazan, Samara, Rostov, and other cities you can see here on the slide. With over 20 years of participation in the multinational clinical studies, Russia has robust infrastructure for quality clinical research. And I would like to ask Irina to elaborate on that.
Thank you, Anna. Indeed, Russia has made a great progress in clinical trials since late 1990s when the first trials were launched. We have clear, straightforward regulations compliant with the international standards for industry. We have, which is very important, logistics infrastructure, warehouses, depots, laboratories, courier companies, also global ones and local ones. And of course, we have a big number of investigational sites. First of all, I would like to explain that not every medical institution may become a clinical site and may participate in clinical trials, because in Russia we have specific procedure when Ministry of Health grants the approval for medical institution to take part in clinical trials. The process, we call it accreditation. So this is a simple process when medical institution facility submits basic information about their equipment, facility, staff, and so on. And according to this information, the Ministry of Health may grant accreditation for phase 1, 2, or 3 studies. All in all, in the database, we have more than 1,600 accredited medical institutions of different types. Needless to say that in every institution, there are several teams, investigators teams works, which gives us even a greater number of investigational sites. And this infrastructure let Russian sites enroll from 60 to 70,000 of patients enrolled every year in, at average, 800 studies per year since 2015. And out of these studies, more than half are launched by the international sponsors. To give you a brief overview and better understanding what is the background for such a good enrollment, I would like to explain a little bit about medical healthcare system in Russia. In Russia, we have different types of medical facilities. First of all, is district outpatient units. These are small facilities providing primary care or facilities which may refer patient to some specialized medical care. And normally, these units do not participate a lot in clinical trials. So we work with these units only if we need some specific indications such as flu, for instance, when all patients with the flu are seen by the general practitioner, or maybe vaccination studies. We have a lot of hospitals, and hospitals includes in their structure not only facilities for hospitalization, but also daycare, consultancy units, diagnostics units, so they can provide any type of medical services for patients. And hospitals may be municipal or may belong to some big corporations or factories. And in the hospitals, there might be, they run a lot of clinical trials. For some specific diseases, we have specialized hospitals, and it's true for pediatric, psychiatry, or geriatric hospitals. We also have centralized healthcare system for certain diseases, usually chronic diseases, and socially important diseases such as HIV, hepatitis, tuberculosis. For that type of disease, there is a system of specialized centers which provide prophylaxis, care, and treatment, all kind of treatment for patients with these diseases. Patient, once diagnosed, will be observed in the same center throughout his or her entire life. So if you need, let's say in the city, to open a site for oncology study, you may go and open just city or a regional oncology center, and you can be sure that almost all patients with oncology indications will be in that center. Also, of course, we have medical universities and academies which run dozens of clinical trials, and we have specialized medical research centers, big centers for specific indications. Centers are really very big. For instance, the biggest oncology center located in Moscow, called Blakhin Cancer Research Center, is a 26-story building with 1,100 beds and 30 laboratories inside it. It's like a city in the city. So now you have a brief overview of the medical environment, and the only important question is left: what motivates patients and principal investigators for participation in clinical trials? Because without this motivation, you will have no enrollment. But before we go to the points on the slide, I must explain something about medical insurance system. So every citizen of Russia has state insurance which covers medical care free of charge. The list of medical services covered by this insurance is quite big, but the tricky thing is that expensive diagnostics or treatment procedures, expensive medications may not be available instantly. There are waiting lists, and for some patients, for instance, for oncology patients, it's not possible for wait for a long time. So the only option is to go to the pharmacy or private clinic and pay for the procedure or buy medication, which in its turn cannot be affordable for some patients. And the other options is to be included into clinical trials. So clinical trials gives patients faster access to free diagnostics and free treatment. And as everywhere in the world, for patients with exhaustive therapeutic options, clinical trials gives access to novel medications, which may help. So what about investigators? What motivates them? First of all, this is ethical reason. In general, physicians and doctors want their patients to be healthy. And if no medication is available or there is a long waiting list, the only option for patient and investigator is to be, again, enrolled into clinical trials. And if a patient fits exclusion criteria, then fits eligibility criteria, then that's very good for patient and for investigator. So the main reason is ethical. Russian investigators can be seen on the international congresses and conferences, and they see participation in clinical trials as one of the ways of their professional development. So scientific interest also means a lot. And it's not a secret that investigators get paid for their work in clinical trials. So financial incentive is also very, very important for Russian investigators. And I prepared some statistics from the international clinical trials in which OCT countries, not only Russia, but other countries as well, participated as a part of a big program. So that I can retrieve comparative data about recruitment between Russian sites and sites in the rest of the countries. The rest of the countries are Western Europe, sometimes United States, or South America. And I also counted for the rest of the countries, other OCT countries such as Ukraine, Belarus, Bulgaria, Georgia, Moldova. So, and I should say that if not for that, countries which I've just listed, enrollment rate in the rest of their countries would be even lower. So you can see that Russia contributes a lot into clinical trials. 1/3, half of a patient, sometimes even more, 2/3 of patients can be enrolled by Russian sites, and the proportion of Russian sites and non-Russian sites is dramatic. So in favor of Russia. And when I calculated average enrollment rates in Russia and in the rest of the countries, surprisingly, I revealed that sometimes this rate is 2 or 3 times higher. Quick enrollment is something that all sponsors want from the CROs and from their sites, but we understand that quick enrollment is not a key to success. So we need data of good quality, and if you enroll many patients in a short period of time, but there are incompliances, there are deviations, and other issues which may compromise data integrity. This is not something we really want. So actually, I'm happy to see that Russian sites produces the data of the recognized quality, of good quality. And so we here in this country have all necessary prerequisites for that. So we have legislation, I've already mentioned it. We have experienced clinical research staff and investigators who work in well-equipped facility. And just not to make unfounded statements, I would like to show you the data we retrieved from FDA website. These are the statistics about results of FDA inspections in Russia for the last 10 years. Just as for comparison, we took also statistics for the United States. And we see that in Russia, more than 2/3, 78% of inspections were completed with no action indicated. And we believe that this is a very good result. In 2010, almost 10 years ago, Russian body which controls quality and safety in clinical trials and of the medication and clinical trials as well. The authority is called Roszdravnadzor, concluded a statement of collaboration with FDA. And another piece of statistics showing that Russian data are accepted by regulators in the United States and in Europe is that in 2018, 14 medications in the United States and 43 medications in Europe were granted marketing authorization, and in clinical trials of these medications, Russia played an important role. There is an opinion that the regulatory process in Russia is very long and complicated, and actually I don't agree with that, and I try to convince you that it's not true. So here are some basics of clinical trial approval procedure. So we have a regulatory body called Ministry of Health, and the whole process of submission and approval takes 3 months. So after we get approval from the Ministry of Health, we need to apply to local ethics. Actually, investigators do that, but we assist them with this process. And in parallel, we need to obtain a special permit to get the medication into the country. It's called import license process. And also export license if we have some biosamples for export. This is in general, and it takes about 2 weeks to get it. So a bit more details about regulatory submission and approval process in Russia. So there is one body which accepts packages of the documents. It's Ministry of Health, I've already said that, and within 5 business days, they perform preliminary expertise for completeness of the documents package. Then they, without involvement of a CRO themselves, refer necessary documents, relevant documents to expert bodies. One is called Council of Ethics. It's within the structure of the Ministry of Health, and they do ethic expertise. And another is the Center of Scientific Evaluation of Medicines. So we call it Pharmacological Expertise Center. And both expert bodies have 30 business days, 30 working days, meaning that it's 1.5 calendar month for doing the expertise. After their conclusions are ready, they send them back to the Ministry of Health, and within another week, 5 business days, Ministry of Health should issue clinical trial approval. Or if experts have some questions, comments, or want some clarification, Ministry of Health will refer this request for clarification to the applicant. So the total timeline, and it's stated in the legislation, it's 40 business days, which is equal to 2 months. So the list of documents for clinical trial approval submission is also not that complicated. I should say that the documents we should submit in, for instance, European Union, the package of documents is more complicated. So we need the package of some administrative documents. It's cover letter, an application completed in the electronic database. So this is done by us, by CRO. Then we need, together with the sponsor, prepare power of attorney, in other words, delegation of authorization letter, and we need to make payment for the expertise. The current cost is about 3,000 euro. Then the package includes some documents about investigational product. This is certificate of analysis, and it's not necessarily to be a certificate for the batch which will be used in reality in clinical trial. Any valid certificate of analysis, valid means with not expired, will be acceptable. We also need to submit GMP certificate for the manufacturing facility, and if the drug is manufactured not by the sponsor but by some contract manufacturing organization, we need to submit documents confirming the relationship of sponsor and CMO. And the basic package of essential documents is protocol, brochure, and informed consent form, and also other materials provided to the patients, like patient cards, diaries, questionnaires, and patient insurance. Here I should note that all documents we submit should be translated into Russian. So when preparing the documents, we need to consider time for translation. So as soon as we have a protocol and IB, usually we submit it for translation immediately, just not to waste time. And finally, information about investigational sites. It's a list of clinical sites and principal investigator CV. So we can see that the package is not that complicated. And to close the topic of the regulatory topic, I would like to just in a couple of words let you know the latest regulatory updates we have in our territories. The first one, maybe you are familiar with that, so that several countries formed the European Asian Union to simplify some logistics and some other processes So the clinical trial process and marketing authorization procedure are also now being harmonized among those countries. So maybe the main advantage of that change is that the states forming the union decided that there will be a centralized marketing authorization procedure. So by applying for marketing authorization in one country with using this centralized procedure, you may get registration certificate, marketing authorization in all these countries, which increase the population which may get access to the drug. And another important change is that this year, 2019, in Russia, Russian authorities finalized procedure for approval of clinical trials of cell therapy. This is a topic for separate webinar, and I believe that in the future we will definitely make it. But so far, just a statement that now it exists, and that type of trial is also possible in Russia.
Thank you, Irina, for giving such a detailed overview of the clinical research situation in Russia. Now that you all learned about the peculiarities of the clinical trial approval process in our country, I have a feeling that conducting a clinical trial in Russia can be quite tricky. And I can understand that. I have to say that it can be tricky, but only unless you have a reliable local partner with in-depth experience and strong resources in the region. Obviously, collaboration with local partners provides the whole range of advantages, such as access to sites and key opinion leaders, understanding of the regulatory process and IMP logistics rules. Local CROs, just like OCT, usually have a library of contracts with local sites, investigators, vendors, so it also helps a lot. And it is especially important to choose a partner that is not only compliant with the international quality standards, but also has extensive experience of cooperation with the local structures and deep understanding of the region. I am proud to say that OCT has been on the grounds of clinical research industry creation and shaping in Russia back in 2005, so almost 15 years ago. The way our company has been developing is we have been taking the best experience of the leading players in the Western world and keeping the same level of quality. Since our first project, which was a study in newborns with respiratory distress syndrome, until today, the company has made a long way. We have grown into a team of almost 200 people in 7 offices, and we are now operational in 8 countries. We are in Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, Bulgaria, Baltic states, Serbia, Moldova, and we also have representatives in the US with our business development offices. As a leading CRO, we have gathered one of the best professional teams in the region. All the staff are in-house. We don't really use any freelancers. All employees are GCP trained. The average industry experience of our cleanups and project managers is over 10 years. All CRAs and project managers have backgrounds, have medical backgrounds, medical degrees, and they can efficiently manage projects in diverse therapeutic areas. Within 15 years, we have accumulated deep experience in over 20 of them, 20 therapeutic areas, and we can easily pick up new indications. Over 50% of our clients are foreign sponsors, so we have undergone a lot of audits by the sponsors, almost 70 system audits, and we also had 2 EMA inspections, no significant findings. Over 45,000 patients have been enrolled by OCT in over 300 studies. It is also important to mention that all clinical trial applications we submitted to the Ministry of Health in Russia have been approved. So basically, we have never had any refusals from our main regulatory body. As I mentioned, OCT is a full-service CRO, but we also provide standalone services such as study design preparation, medical writing, monitoring, consulting. Experience that our team has accumulated shows that we have thorough understanding of all the peculiarities of clinical research projects in our region. And you know very well that project planning is a crucial part. And we know how important it is to anticipate and estimate all possible risks before the study has started. The basic principle of OCT work is quality above all. And we always want to deliver what we promise and stay in line with the budget and timelines. That is why the first thing we do when we start communication with the sponsor of the next clinical study is feasibility analysis. This is something we do in our every project. And as a bonus to all participants of today's webinar, we would like to propose free feasibility analysis of the clinical studies you are planning in Russia or in other Eastern European countries. We believe that this can help you advance your clinical research strategy. So if you're interested, if you have been thinking about enrolling some patients in the Russian sites or at sites in other Eastern European countries, if you have any concerns about that or uncertain, please reach out to me. Here are my contact details. You can see them on the screen, or you can also type in the chat box that you're interested, and I will reach out to you and follow up with that. I think we're now ready to answer the questions, and I can see quite a lot of questions here. The question a lot of people have been asking is whether we're going to be sharing the presentation. Yes, of course. After the webinar, we will send out the presentation to all the participants. Other questions we have is, let me see. Do you apply any extra recruitment tools, bonuses, advertisement, etc.? I think it's a great question. Irina, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, Anna, thanks. Actually, luckily, by default, enrollment in Russia is very good. But of course, there are trials where sometimes we experience difficulties enrolling subjects. The solution, there is no universal solution. We start usually with a root cause analysis, and each site, as our experience shows, has its own reasons of slow enrollment. So the solution for each site will be individual. It doesn't work like one size fits all. We arrange bonuses, and recruitment will raise instantly at all sites. It doesn't work like that. So talking about advertisements, we tried it in several trials. I wouldn't say that like advertising of the study in the in the district outpatient units where patients may be seen for primary care. But I wouldn't say that it worked very well. So in our experience, organization of setting up of referrals may help a lot. If our investigator or the site does not have own referral pathways, we may help them to establish. And actually, because in Russia, patients trust their doctors most of advertisement and something else. So it's easier to transfer patient from one physician to another. This is the most reliable way. So this is how I can answer.
Thank you, Irina. I think we have another question that is the same topic. Advertisements on social media legal in Russia, and are they legal on local television?
I've never seen any advertisement of clinical trials on local television. Yes, the advertisement is legal, but you need to approve the text of advertisement by the ethics committee. Actually, there is a phenomena in Russia when awareness of the general population about clinical trials is really low. If you ask 100 people on the street about clinical trials, what do they know, what they have heard about it, I bet that no one will tell you anything. Maybe some of people may mention some experiments on animals, but in general, people are not aware of the clinical trials, what it gives. This is all explained by investigators to patients. And even I guess that if subject, patient, will see something, some advertisement about clinical trials, he or she just won't understand what is it about. So as I told before, so in our opinion, what works is establishing of referral and referral fee. And referral fee is also legal.
Thank you. Other questions we have here. Do you have offices in the US? Yes, as I mentioned, we do have offices, but these are business development offices that we have in Boston and in New York. One more question. Are there patients that are impossible or challenging? Irina, would you like to comment?
Yes, sure. Although business development does not let me say that something is impossible, I should admit that some specific types of subjects are really difficult for enrollment on our territories. So the general issue is patients with orphan diseases. For some orphan diseases, we have patient associations or some centralized databases, but for majority of orphan diseases, we don't have such databases, and it's very difficult in such a huge territory to find a single patient with orphan disease. So that's one of the challenges. Another challenge, so maybe you know that Russia is very good for enrollment of treatment-naive patients, especially when it comes to target therapy, biologic therapy, because of the reasons I mentioned before. So it's this medication even may not be registered or marketed, or it's very difficult. The availability is very limited. So on the vice versa, if in the protocol and inclusion-exclusion criteria you have some predefined specific therapy, especially if it's expensive therapy, latest therapy, and you enroll in your study patients who failed that types of therapy, most likely it would be very difficult to enroll such patients in Russia. At the moment, we are running big rheumatological study in rheumatoid arthritis. So there is a set of trials, and one trial enrolls patients who failed previous biologic therapy, and another trial enrolls treatment-naive patients. So enrollment rate differs maybe 5 or 6 times. So it's very difficult to find patients who failed biologic therapy. And majority of these patients just come from previous clinical trials. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Irina. We have a comment from Katarina. She's saying that she read an article in Pharma Letters about some concerns that companies have about conducting clinical trials in Russia, but they didn't give any specifics. So do some companies have concerns about this, and how can they be addressed? Irina, would you like to comment on that?
Actually, it's very difficult to comment because there is no specific given. So I cannot answer this question because I need some specific.
All right. Another question, why Armenia is not on the list? Recently, we, FMD, KNL, signed a CDA with your company. Yes, that's right. We don't have any office in Armenia. That's why we didn't put it on the list. But Armenia is a great country. We'll be happy to expand there. One more question. How difficult you find the clinical trial agreement and site budget negotiation?
It's tough sometimes, but I can say that the structure of the budget, which is acceptable for Russian investigators and sites, is not that difficult. So you divide grant into 2 parts. One is hospital part, and another is investigator part. And we don't have any list of procedures which are rated separately, and you need to calculate the amount of biochemistry or hematological analysis. So it's just 2 parts. Hospital, which includes all procedures done by the local laboratory, by investigators, and investigator part. As for the legal part of this question, we know the hospitals and the usually these are big facilities and medical universities. That type of institutions are very difficult in terms of negotiation of contract. But we have a very long history on the Russian market, and we accumulate certain experience, so we know which, so we use templates, try to use templates, which causes as just few comments.
Thank you, Rina. Another interesting question, which I think I'll again address to you, is what is the situation with patient grants in Russia? I guess it's the question about preparation grant fees.
Oh, it's difficult to answer because you see grant pretty much depend on the flow chart, on study procedures you have, and on the indication, because for a certain indication there are certain investigators' expectations in terms of investigators' grant. So I may give you an example of, let's say, oncology study, 1 year oncology study with, let's say, computer tomography. Let's say the grant may vary from 8,000 to 10,000 US dollars, like that, for completed patients. That's all which I can say.
Thank you. I hope this is helpful. Another question, what is the determining factor for you when choosing a site in Russia? The experience of the principal investigator, the reputation of a large hospital, and the willingness to provide the necessary research quality?
All of that factors matters, of course. This is all written in our standard operating procedures for selection of investigators. Whenever possible, we check the feedback about performance of this site. This is very important. And we trust our own experience. And if we don't have experience, we try to obtain feedback from other colleagues. And of course, it is important that the site has sufficient staff resources, because sometimes, enrollment is limited not by availability of patients. Enrollment is limited by site capabilities. There are no, the team is small. There is no enough investigators. They don't have time. They're too busy with their routine work. And if we see that they have issues with the quality, they have backlogs, we don't let them enroll patients further until they resolve all these issues. So the matter of sufficient staff resources is very important. And also, of course, availability of patients. We discuss patient pathway using our leaky pipe model, where the patients can be lost on their way to the site. So we discuss it in detail during site qualification visits to make sure that further on we will have 0 non-enrolling sites.
Thank you, Rina. Katarina is elaborating on her question about the concerns about clinical trials in Russia. Do pharma companies have any concerns about the quality of clinical trials conducted in Russia? She's saying, I'm just curious if there are any general concerns and how they can be addressed.
Anna, have any foreign potential companies ask you about any specific concerns?
Yes.
Because I cannot remember.
I mean, I think this is covered pretty much with our slide that Rina was commenting on about the number of findings. Yeah, I mean, the best way to address this question is to show some official statistics. And this is what I'm usually doing when communicating with European or especially American companies who may have the same question. Official statistics shows that the number of findings, FDA inspections in Russia is even lower than in the US. And I think it's a great answer to this question. And another perfect way to make sure that everything is fine with the quality of clinical studies in Russia is to get references. I get references from the companies that have been doing clinical trials here many times. And usually this is something that we do. We provide contact details of the companies. We have been working with more than 100 sponsors, and we can provide reference from them. I think it's the best way to persuade, so to say, other companies that there are no problems here in Russia.
And I would like to add that we have a lot of repeat business.
Yeah, that's also a very
yeah.
That's also a very good point. I don't think we have any other questions left. So I would like to thank you very much for attending this webinar today. We really hope you found it useful, and we're glad to be of help to you in planning your next clinical study. So keep in touch. Thank you very much and have a nice day or evening.